sat at my desk, my head bowed down. I was staring at it. That stupid mark. It was faint, almost translucent, like a shimmer of moonlight against my skin. White ink. The one that only appeared when you'd met your soulmate. Supposedly rare, supposedly magical, supposedly not real, except it was right there, on my wrist. I rubbed at it again like I had a dozen times already, hoping it was just paint from art class or maybe the ghost of a graphite smudge from my sketchbook. But it didn't budge. It shimmered, like it was mocking me. I had heard the rumors, everyone had, that when two soulmates touched, a white ink mark would appear on both their wrists. Fairy tale nonsense, I always thought. Something cooked up by hopeless romantics or attention seekers. Though a part of me believed it, I didn't believe it could happen to me. And yet, here I was. And the worst part, the absolute nightmare part, it happened after he touched me. Minjae. I almost laughed, but it came out more like a scoff. Minjae, of all people, arrogant, loud, annoyingly good at everything Minjae. I refused to believe it. There had to be some kind of mistake. The universe couldn't possibly think he was my person. Because if it was true, I was doomed. It wasn't just that we didn't get along, though we really didn't. It wasn't just that he was cocky, competitive, and pushed every single one of my buttons. No, the real problem was our mothers. They hated each other, like full-on social war kind of hate. Old drama, high society tension, whatever it was, it ran deep. If they found out their sons were soulmates, they'd probably explode. No, it was better this way. Keep it secret. Pretend it didn't happen. Push it so far down that even I forgot. I was so deep in my thoughts that I almost didn't notice the sudden burst of energy near the back of the room. Chairs scraping, sneakers squeaking on the floor. Minjae and his entourage, Taeyong and the rest of the basketball guys, were getting ready to head out for practice. He threw his backpack over his shoulder with effortless ease, laughing at something Taeyong said. That laugh, that stupid charming laugh. I hated how easily it got under my skin. I watched them from the corner of my eye as they filed out, joking and shoving each other like a scene straight out of a high school drama. Everyone loved Minjae. He was the kind of guy who made everything look easy, athletic, confident, handsome in that infuriatingly perfect way. Teachers adored him. Students admired him. Even the cafeteria lady smiled extra wide when she saw him coming. And me? I was fine, I guess. I wasn't invisible. People liked me well enough. I was smart, second only to Minjae, and I'd heard girls call me cute more than once in the hallway. But standing next to him, I always felt like I was living in his shadow, like I was trying to shine in a sky where he was already the sun. I shook the thought away and stared back down at my wrist. The mark was still there, glowing faintly under the classroom light. It didn't matter how perfect Minjae seemed or how many times my heart betrayed me with these annoying little flutters when he was near. This mark couldn't make anything go further. Not now, not ever, and especially not when it was written in ink. It was late by the time night class ended, and the campus was already starting to empty out. The cool air wrapped around me as I stepped onto the sidewalk. My bag felt heavier than usual, or maybe that was just the emotional weight of the day. I still hadn't stopped thinking about the mark. I sighed, shoved my hands into my pockets, and kept walking, wanting nothing more than to go home, shut my door, and pretend the universe hadn't just played a cosmic joke on me.
Juna!
I froze at the sound of my name. I didn't even have to look to know who it was. I turned around and, of course, Taeyong jogging toward me like a scene straight out of some feel-good drama. His bleach-white hair glinted under the streetlights, a little messy in that intentionally chaotic way K-pop trainees seem to master. Always smiling, always bouncing.
Wait up. You're heading home, right? Let's walk together.
I blinked at him, caught off guard. You live in my direction?
Kind of. Close enough. Besides, walking with someone's more fun than walking alone, right?
That was the thing about Taeyong. He had this natural energy that made you feel like you were already in the middle of a conversation, even if you hadn't said a word yet. I never really encouraged it, but he never seemed to care. He was always like this with me. randomly showing up in my space, asking me how my day was, calling my sketches cool, and teasing me about how serious I always looked. Flirting? Maybe, maybe not. I honestly never knew what he was thinking. Still, I nodded slightly. I did not like him. He was just a lot. We had barely started walking when I heard another voice behind us. Lower, a little rough with exhaustion.
Jihoon.
I turned and my stomach dropped. Minjae. He was walking toward us from the gym building, towel around his neck, hair damp with sweat. His training uniform clung to him, and he looked like he'd just run 10 laps and had been in an argument about it. But what really caught my attention was his expression. Tight-jawed, eyes sharp, definitely not pleased.
Hey, Minjae, we were just...
Minjae cut him off, his eyes never leaving mine.
We live on the same street. We'll just go home together.
There was no hi, no explanation, just that. I blinked. Oh, yeah, I guess we do. The silence that followed was thick. Taeyong raised an eyebrow at Minjae, who was now standing way too close to me. Just a step ahead of Taeyong, almost like he was physically blocking me from moving in that direction. I could feel the tension tightening like a rope between the two of them. This was weird, like really weird. Taeyong laughed a little, but it sounded forced.
Wow. Is this a coincidence, or are you two just secretly attached at the hip now?
Minjae shot him a look I couldn't quite decode, but it wasn't friendly. I suddenly felt like a rope in a tug-of-war match I didn't ask to be in. Guys, I said quickly, hands up. Don't fight over something dumb. It's just a walk home. Taeyong opened his mouth, probably with another teasing remark, but I cut in before either of them could escalate it. I'll go with Minjae, I said, trying to sound casual, like it didn't feel like I was choosing sides in a silent battle. It makes sense. We're literally neighbors. Taeyong gave me a small smile, but there was a flicker of something behind it.
All right, next time then.
He winked at me, because of course he did, then turned and strolled off like nothing had happened. But I could feel the air shift as soon as he was gone. I started walking, Minjae falling into step beside me. We didn't say anything for a while, just the sound of our footsteps and the distant buzz of streetlights humming above us. We walked side by side down the quiet street, the air between us filled with nothing, just awkward silence and the faint sound of our sneakers on the pavement. It wasn't like we were that far apart physically, maybe a foot or so, but it felt like miles, like I was standing on the edge of a cliff and he was still back at the mountain base. Minjae cleared his throat.
You good? You're acting weird.
I hesitated. I'd been dreading this moment, him noticing. Of course he would. He wasn't as dense as I liked to pretend he was. I shrugged a little too quickly, keeping my eyes ahead. I'm fine. It's just weird, I guess. You walking home with me. There was a beat of silence before he responded.
I mean, we are working on that art project together. So, I figured despite our constant bickering, maybe we could try not hating each other, at least until the project's over.
I risked a sideways glance at him. His expression was unreadable but not unfriendly. Still, my heart wouldn't stop hammering in my chest. It was way too much having him this close, especially after what had happened earlier. Then he added, more casually than I expected.
Also, if you ever need someone to walk home with, you could just ask me. You don't have to go with Taeyong.
That made me stop for a second. Not physically, but in my head. Why did that sound like something else? I blinked. I'm fine walking home on my own, I said quickly, trying to sound chill, unaffected, even though my voice cracked slightly on the word fine. I like the quiet. Gives me time to think.
Suit yourself,
he said with a shrug, but I felt his eyes flick toward me again. We walked the rest of the way in silence, our houses slowly coming into view. His was just a few doors down from mine. Funny how we'd lived that close for years and barely spoken outside of school. As we stopped near the dividing line between our homes, there was that awkward pause. First, the one where people don't know if they're supposed to say goodbye, nod, or just vanish. Before I could figure out which one to go with, Minjae reached out and clapped his hand lightly against my back. It wasn't hard or anything, just a friendly gesture. But the moment his skin touched mine, the mark flared to life again, brighter this time, warm, undeniable. My breath caught. I tried to yank my arm back, but it was too late. His eyes were already on it, narrowing.
Wait, what's that?
He asked, confused, pointing to my wrist. Panic. Full-blown panic set in. I did the only thing my brain could manage. I turned and ran. The second I stepped inside the house, I slammed the door shut and leaned back against it, trying to steady my breathing. My heart was still racing like I just outrun a ghost or, well, Minjae. My mom popped her head out of the kitchen, wiping her hands on a dish towel.
Jihoon, what's wrong with you? You look like you just saw something terrible.
I opened my mouth, ready to blurt something out. Anything, maybe even the truth. But before I could speak, a loud honk blasted from outside. Not once, but twice. Then a third time, impatient and dramatic. Mom's whole body tensed like someone had just insulted her ancestors.
Oh, for heaven's sake.
She muttered, marching toward the window.
That woman again.
I didn't even need to look. I already knew who it was. Minji's mom in her giant, expensive SUV, honking like she was trying to summon someone from the dead.
She doesn't have the decency to come down and knock? Just sits in that ridiculous car honking like a mad woman. Uncouth. That's the word. Uncouth.
I stood there awkwardly, still catching my breath, still thinking about the mark on my wrist. But just like that, I wasn't the main character anymore. The moment had passed. My mom had already moved on to her usual rant about her arch-nemesis across the street. So I quietly disappeared into my room. I collapsed onto my bed face first and groaned into the pillow. The mark, the way it glowed again when Minjae touched me, the way he looked at me, confused but not angry. It all kept replaying in my head like a broken video loop. I sat up slowly and rolled up my sleeve. The mark was faint now, just a pale shimmer beneath my skin, but it was still there. If Minjae was my soulmate, things would be bad. And I don't mean teenage drama bad. I mean catastrophic. Our mothers could barely exist in the same zip code without going to war. If I ended up with Minjae, it'd be like throwing a match into a gasoline tank. They'd destroy each other. And us too. Just my luck? I mumbled, sinking deeper into my bed. Then I heard my mom's voice outside my door.
Come out and eat before it gets cold.
I dragged myself up, washed my face in the bathroom to look a little less emotionally wrecked, and headed to the dining table. The usual spread was there: kimchi stew, rice, a couple side dishes. Homey, comforting, like nothing in the world was burning. Mom was already seated, sipping water and scrolling through her phone. She glanced at me briefly, then said,
Jihoon, the exams are coming up soon.
I murmured, lifting my spoon.
You must beat that Minjae this time. Do you hear me?
I paused mid-bite, looking up. What?
Don't act surprised. You came second again last time, didn't you? That boy's always just a hair ahead. You need to stop letting him win. It's embarrassing.
I swallowed slowly. The stew that had just comforted me suddenly felt like a rock in my throat. Okay, I said quietly. She didn't even notice the shift in my tone.
You're better than him. You always have been. Don't let people forget that. Especially not her son.
By her, she meant Minji's mom. My mom hated her like it was a full-time job. She blamed her for everything. Her failed relationships, her loneliness, her bitterness. I never fully understood why. I mean, sure, I knew there was some history between them, but Mom never told me the full story. Just fragments of resentment layered with sharp jabs and muttered insults. Sometimes I wondered if the reason her relationships didn't work out was because she was always so angry, so guarded, always competing with ghosts. After dinner, she stood up and pointed toward the hallway.
Now go. Study until midnight. No slacking.
I nodded, carrying my dishes to the sink. Got it. I returned to my room, closed the door, and locked it with a soft click. I sat at my desk, opened my math book, and stared blankly at the first page. The formulas made my eyes glaze over. My brain felt like soup. After 15 minutes, I dropped my pencil. Nope, I got up, tiptoed to my closet, and reached behind a stack of old books and folders. I pulled out a worn sketch pad, the one I never showed anyone. I flipped it open slowly, page by page. Minjae in profile, resting his head on his desk. Minjae tying his basketball shoes. Minjae smiling, though I had to draw that one from memory since he never really smiled at me. I sighed, settled in my chair, and picked up a pencil. And for the first time that day, I smiled. Not the kind I wore at school. A real one. Drawing him didn't feel scary. Felt familiar. Safe. Even if the world hated the idea of us. At least here, on paper, I could pretend. But I had no idea that my fate was going to change from then on. Thanks for watching. Do like and subscribe to the channel for more episodes.